All right, well, thank you and welcome everyone. My name is Karen Regie. I'm the Dean of Online Learning and Media Services for the Community College of Philadelphia. And I have with me today some esteemed colleagues, so I'll let them introduce themselves. Peter?
Good morning. My name is Peter Margolis, Director of Online Learning. As you might imagine, I work very closely with my dean.
Hi, good morning. I'm Laura Temple, Business Intelligence at the college. I've been doing this kind of stuff for about 30 years in different settings. And it's a pleasure to work with Karen and Peter on this one. On many things, actually.
Well, we're lucky. Laura is really our data guru. I don't know what we would do without her. So I am an avid fisherwoman. I have been fishing since I was a kid, and I can even tie my own flies. This was last summer. I was out on the Chesapeake Bay and got this great striper. And I have also fished a lot of lakes, but I have never fished a data lake until now. So here's what we're going to do today, tell you a little bit about our fishing expedition in the data lake. So Peter's going to share how we are collecting data, some of the previous practices and some of the newer practices. And then I'm going to provide some background on the data lake and then talk about how we're actually using that. So we had a research study going, and I'll share that with you and some of our findings. And then we'll wrap it up with discussing the benefits of using a data lake, particularly to examine student success data. So I'm going to pass that off to Peter.
Thank you. As you can see from the slide, our data landscape has evolved over the last couple of years. In the dim reaches of the past of 2 years ago, you can see the sort of things we were collecting, primarily coming out of our LMS. We use Canvas and our student information service system, Banner. In the intervening 2 years, the breadth of data that we have been collecting and the granularity of it, as you can see from the 2023 list, has gotten much more detailed. We're focusing on student outcomes. We can see who's logging in when and what they're doing in the courses. And that's good stuff. We're certainly still doing the same things we were doing in 2021 and collecting a great deal more as well. That expanded data compendium raises a number of questions. First of all, are we collecting the right stuff? What should we be collecting? There actually are no national standards, so we're sort of maybe we will create the national standard. We're sort of flying by the seat of our pants on this. Another question that arises, maybe the most central question of all, is what do we do with it? How do we leverage this data to improve our operations? How to pull this together and how to slice and dice it and then draw conclusions that are actionable is a major concern of ours. And of course, where is it coming from? Those types of data that you saw in the previous slide are from different places. They're from the LMS. They're from from our Banner SIS system. Some of it resides in corners of the online learning office. Where is it coming from? How do we get our hands on? How do we pull it together to make it useful? These different systems do not typically talk to each other. That is our challenge, and this is what brings us to the lake.
So in 2021, we worked with Amazon Web Services to build the data lake. And we did it, actually, Laura did it, in only 2 weeks. So imagine if you could get every last little piece of data from every field in your LMS, and to be able to collate it with other enterprise systems on campus, for example, the SIS, or even your recruitment tool or your early alert system. And so that's the power of creating a data lake. So before the data lake, in Canvas, we had to extract data in a couple of ways. Obviously, there's fairly robust reporting that the admin can pull right from the dashboard. But then there's also some behind the scenes reports that can be pulled. And those had a 10-page instruction manual, and you had to download 5 separate table files, which then got unzipped and extracted and put into Excel spreadsheet. So it was kind of an unwieldy process. So here's sort of a snapshot of what that looked like. It was a single static snapshot report. There was no way to interact the data. It is what it is. It's just, here are the numbers. In the data lake, though, we were able to build a data portal specifically for Canvas. And this is in the AWS platform. And so this gives us access to all and every table and field element in Canvas. And so you can see on the left-hand side, there's some examples of the types of data elements that we can create. Now, again, there's its own language. You have to learn what each of these, the nomenclature and what each of these mean. But we are able to get all data out. So that's why we can create the lake of data sources. We can pull the Canvas data directly into the same lake that we're also dumping the Banner and our recruit system and our Starfish early alert system. So we have multiple sources of data in the lake. So think of it sort of like fish, a whole bunch of fish swimming around the same lake at the same time. So here's a snapshot of our Tableau dashboard. And so Tableau is the software we use to extract the data from the lake. And this is also where Laura has a magical touch here. She builds us customized screens and has customized filters. So on the right-hand side, you can see all the filters that we've asked her to build. So anything here, and also how it's displayed, she can pull and create anything we want for a dashboard. So let's talk a little bit about our research study. We basically just started fishing the lake. We started with the hypothesis that so many of us want to confirm, and that is that student engagement in online courses lead to higher pass rates, right? But obviously there are way too many confounding variables to that. So we decided that we needed to narrow it down. And we started looking at how much activity, and not just how much activity, but how many different types of activity. Does more variety of activity in an online course affect the student outcomes? And so we still had to narrow that further because we have a lot of students. So we started looking at new first-time students. And when we're talking about a variety of activities, they're specifically labeled as content types in Canvas. And so there are 8 particular content types, but we were really focusing on 4 of them. Discussions, assignments, quizzes, and then external URLs. So that would be links out to, say, videos or adaptive learning platforms and things like that. So our hypothesis ended up being that a wider variety of content types lead to success rates and for new first-time students. Obviously, we can't control for the quality of the course design or the technology that's available for the student, which is why we had to narrow it down a bit. So then we started looking at the literature, and Dixon had some really interesting ways of categorizing some of the activities. So Dixon categorized them into 2 main areas: active, which were the discussion boards, assignments, and case studies, and then the passive, which was more of the watch videos, read lectures, take quizzes. And Dixon found that the level of interaction, not the type, made a difference in the engagement, although it wasn't clear what level meant. And so we were taking it to mean the number of interactions. Miller and Green, both of them started looking at interactivity and achievement in online courses. And again, you're probably familiar with the types of interactions we commonly find: learner to content, learner to instructor, and learner to learner. So that's what they were focusing on. Although their studies weren't super conclusive in how they affected student success. Where we start to see some real interesting work is with Aguda Peregrino from Spain. And in 2004, they started looking at the relationship between student activity and final grades. And they found very little correlation and no predictive capability for that, which was very interesting. Although the challenge was with their study, they were only looking at the LMS data, right, from their Moodle logs. And then Kenneth Strang from Plattsburgh built upon some of that research and used some mixed methods to start to include some of the demographic data. And he was also finding that these were unrelated factors in online course outcomes. The only thing that he did find was that the more time students spent on a quiz, the higher the score was. And again, he was only using LMS data, and the demographic data that he gathered from the SIS was analyzed via just Excel spreadsheets. So there wasn't any dynamic way of controlling and correlating the data from the LMS and the SIS. So we started looking at this and talking through the study and came up with several control variables and some things that we wanted to clearly define. So when we talk about activities, we group them by the number of distinct content types. So as I mentioned in Canvas, there are 8 different activity content or content types. And so you will see them in our research group from 0 to 8. And that means that it has like how many different types of content are there. So if there's a quiz and an assignment, that would be counted as 2. If there's a quiz, assignment, and a discussion, that would be counted as 3. We also decided that we were going to look at only asynchronous courses, not our synchronous courses, and that the first time students did not actually include the transfer students. So we did control for that as well. We also had to define success and failure. And for us, A, B, C, or a pass is considered success. Failures are D and Fs, but we did not include any withdrawals or incompletes. A couple of caveats of our study: we're using this data operationally. We're not actually trying to further the scholarship. And we are looking at the number of different types of activities and the overall number of activities, but we're not actually considering, were these quality online courses, and does that affect the final outcomes? We're not taking into other accounts variables like the students' access to technology or course design, or even synchronous classroom management. So for example, hand raising or real-time polls. However, asynchronous polls and activities would have been counted. We are also using only gradable sections of the course. We're not using non-credit courses or labs, and we include only enrolled students, not those who had dropped or withdrawn. And then finally, we know our faculty often change the grades, so we use the final grades from the SIS and not the LMS. Not the LMS. So here's what we found. With just some preliminary work, again, we haven't done any regression modeling, so this isn't a formal study, but it does show you how we're collecting and analyzing the data. So the first thing to know is that of our new first-time students in asynchronous courses, we look specifically at fall 22, and this is an unduplicated head count. So if a student is taking 2 courses, we counted them twice. You can see the number of courses and the number of content types that we had. So again, if it says 2, it could be a discussion and a quiz. There were 2 different types. And you can see our success rate and our failure rate here. And we actually averaged the rates, and I'll show you this in a minute, across the content, the number of content activities. And this was the independent variable that we were using. So here's what the data look like. And so on the left, you see that how many different content types we had, and the success rates when we had more of a variety of content types. And then we averaged the success rates together to get the success rate average as a 60%. Now, another thing to notice is we're going to talk a lot about range. So this one has a fairly tight range of only a 9% difference between the 58% and the 67%. So we also, in addition to range, started looking for patterns. So are there any patterns? For example, does the higher number of types of activities or a more variety of activity actually lead to higher success rates? And so here you can see there are no patterns, and it did actually confirm what the Aguado-Peregrina study said, even though they were just using the data from the LMS, and we're using both the LMS and the SIS. So we started digging in a little bit deeper and started digging into some of the demographics. And here are just some general success rates. And again, unfortunately, you'll see that traditionally underserved learners are at a lower rate, success rate than the whites and the Asians. Then we started looking at some more independent variables. So first we looked at course load. And here on the right, I've actually given you the breakout of the part-time students. So this is where we started seeing something very interesting. We started seeing the wider range between the outcomes. So for here on the part-time, you'll notice that the range is 26. So it's a big difference between 45% and 71%. And again, for full-time, even though it had a 66% range, the 66% success rate, the range was only about 15. So we also looked at these are the success rates again for the gender and for the age, but we did also look at the range again. So for example, on gender, the range was for females was 17 and for males was 13. But again, we were seeing no patterns that's telling us that the more variety of content types made an actual difference. We started looking at class size as well, and this got a little bit interesting. The average range here was 25. The range of the averages was 25, but that doesn't tell us much about the numbers of activities. You know, this is just straight demographic data, right? How many people were in the class. So we started digging into these. So we took the 20 to 25 range, so 21 to 25 students in that class, and we broke it out. And then this is where we started to see some interesting things. Again, there were no patterns, but we had a very wide range here of 44 from 57% to 100% success rates. We also wanted to look at students by whether they were college ready or whether they still had to take developmental courses. So notice the difference in range. The college ready is 15, but the developmental is 40. So it's a very wide range. We also want to note that the first-time developmental students don't often take online courses. So look at the N, it's 105 compared to 991. And this is partly due to the lower number of developmental courses that are offered asynchronously. And that's just the way we do it. We generally offer more hybrid or face-to-face developmental courses. We also do have a variable on our Tableau dashboard to look at English and math placement. But for that, we need to pull out the data separately and make sure that we include all the students, not just the first-time new students or not just those taking asynchronous classes. We need to really take a look at all students placing below college ready, not just the new first-time students, to make that data really meaningful. So let's take a look at the activities in specific. So again, our hypothesis was suggesting that more variety of content in a course, the more successful the students would be. So again, there are more types of content activities, but we're focusing on the four. We're focusing on discussions, assignments, quizzes, and links to the external URLs because we believe that's content like YouTube videos or also to the adaptive learning platforms. So the next data that we're going to show you guarantees that the content type would be part of the course. So when we're counting the numbers, that means that that content type is definitely included in here. So in this slide, I've divided the four content types up by Dixon's rating. So the actives and the passives. So we can't break out the content type separately right now. We have to actually create a new dashboard, which we're hoping Laura's going to do for us soon. But the number of content types, as I mentioned, is at least one, and we can filter for those. They're in there, we filtered for them. So a future study on how each of the individual activities plays a role in student success is still needed. We really need to dig into them and say, for example, do the discussion boards play a role, or does the number of discussion boards play a role in student success? And we can do that. We just have to build the dashboards. And again, here is the data for the passive part, for the passive activities. And you'll see again, the ranges are fairly narrow and there are no specific patterns. So what do we conclude? So similar to the literature, we found that there really was no significant difference in overall success based upon the variety of activities, the number of different types of activities in an online course for our first-time college students. But however, when we drilled into the details, we started seeing more variations in the success rates, and that was predominantly due to the wide range. So when we look at the variables that are influencing success rate, we look at those where the range was greater than or equal to 40, and those ended up being class size and college level readiness. So we have a lot more research we need to do around the type of activities by demographic. So for example, do discussion boards make a difference to students who are over the age of 50? So that's a question we could drill down into. We looked again only at the new first-time students, and perhaps those are the students who are already engaged. And so we're wondering if the results would change if we looked at students who had, say, for example, 45 credits or more. So we've all heard the saying, being data rich and information poor. And I'll tell you that having the data lake makes you rich, not just rich, it makes you a data billionaire. However, you only become information rich as you actually start fishing in the lake. So you have to bait the hook with the appropriate questions that use data across the systems. And you have to really intentionally think about where is that data coming from so you can create those questions that pull in data from the various sources in the lake. So we'll share some of the ways, some of the benefits and the ways that we're actually using data beyond our little study here that we've been doing. So first, it's great fun to be able to use data and explore in a user-friendly environment. It's just literally clicking a button and one of those the filters on the right side of our Tableau dashboard, and we can do whatever we want. We can filter for multiple things. We have total control of how we dig into the data. And so we think about, future data modeling just because of the filters that we have. And again, we can customize those filters. But we're also using data in the lake in other ways. And one of the main ways we're doing that is what we're calling scheduling for success. So we have created dashboards that have fill rates in them, and we are able to look at those by course modalities. So we've trained our department heads to watch that and use the Tableau dashboards to go in and look at how fast are the courses filling, the online asynchronous courses filling, or the online synchronous courses filling, and using that data to help them make decisions when they need to add another section or if they need to cancel a section. We also have been able to send automated messages from the LMS through the early alert system, and we use Starfish. And so this helps us with login in the first week of the semester. So Canvas is now talking to Starfish via the data lake. And so we can also correlate this data as well with our SIS data if we want and pull back the results. But what happens is after the first week of classes, there's a script that's run between Canvas and Starfish, and it tells Starfish, or it says sends a message to all those students who have not logged into Canvas. It's an automated message and says, hey, it's actually from me. It's a little email that says, hey, student success happens when you log in to your online course, right? So it's a gentle nudge to the students. And we're actually watching the data to see how quickly after they receive that message, do they log in, and to see if it changes their success rate. So again, that goes back into the data lake because we're pulling out those final grades and success rates, and we can again correlate that as well with demographics. So we're also using it to answer further questions. There are a zillion questions that we have. So for example, does the time of day that a student logs into an asynchronous course affect the success rate? So that's one that we can answer. Really, the depths of the ocean are the limit here. And so when we start using the data lake, and it sometimes makes me question, do we really, what type of data should we be collecting? Is that question actually needed? Or is that question irrelevant because for us, all data is collected? And so instead, do we need to ask, how do we effectively use the data lake to answer our deepest questions and make some meaningful decisions around quality design and delivery of online courses so that we can move the needle on student success? And with that, these are our references so that you'll have them in the slideshow, and we will take some questions. All right, I see a bunch of new messages here. Okay, so I see this. I see one in here. My Blackboard Ultra LMS provides me data about critical thinking, grade level of writing, and other data, trying to figure out how to collect the data with other data from the course. Yeah, do you want to unmute and tell us a little bit more about that? And let's see if I can get you to unmute. And it's Margaret, correct?
Yes. Hello. I'm from the University of Illinois at Chicago. We use Blackboard, and some of us are in the transition of upgrading to Blackboard Ultra, and all the individual assessments use once the students post their thing, the system actually provides information. I don't know how accurate it is actually about the students' critical thinking level, what grade level they're writing at, and several other components. So I'm still in the process of figuring out how to pull that information to use it with the other data that you've mentioned that you could more easily pull just from the grade book. But in my opinion, I think it's sort of important to also take a look at the course design, because in some cases it's different if you have a class of all quizzes, tests, and just essays versus it's a project-based type of class, and you want to measure if students are really improving as they go on. So
yeah, that's great. And again, that's where the data lake is really helpful. So I don't know if you have built a data lake or not, but then that would be really great data, especially around the critical thinking and the grade level of the writing, because we don't have access to that data and just the placement data, which we haven't really had a chance to dig into yet. But that would be fascinating to start to correlate some of that with success rates, and even some of the demographics, because it can help inform the course design, right?
Right. We're just new at this, at the Ultra. We're just in the transitioning phase, so everyone's learning it. So
great. Thank you for sharing that. Laura, there's a question in the chat for you. How can I learn about building a data lake?
Well, couple of things. You can just contact me offline because it could be a little bit lengthy, but let me give you the short version of what we did with the Canvas, the LMS system. We contracted with Amazon Web Services, and AWS actually bought and brought in Harvard's solution to basically take all of the tables that are in Canvas. And I don't know how many of you use Canvas, but if you try to bring a table in, you've got to go to the portal, all those 5 steps, all those 10 pages that you saw. This actually allowed us to just literally bring in the whole data set into our system. And Tableau is a wonderful tool in that it can look at multiple data sources at the same time. So I'll put my email address here, and then please feel free to contact me unless you've got some questions here that can be answered.
Any other questions for us today?
Was there a cost on the Amazon services? Minimal, because actually there were very few schools that were doing what we were doing. So they kind of bent over backwards to kind of help. It may be now, but of course, once you have it, what happens is that every night the data set, the whole data set, is refreshed. It's kind of an intermittent. So you've got an incremental build. So there will be minimal charge for the services of just having that run in the background. And again, I can get you more information on that. It is really, though, I'm going to say worth it if you are pulling data out of your learning management systems, because at least in Canvas, it was really, really clunky. And they wanted to charge us a gazillion dollars to do some sort of pulling down connections. And this was really inexpensive. And as Karen has said, we can now, for example, you don't have class size aggregate information in our LMS. You don't have the students' English and math scores. You don't have when the faculty started. You don't know how long the faculty member has been there. You don't know, you can now cut and slice and dice this by the pathways, by the majors. There's so much more available to you in addition to what you have in your LMS system.
Lana has a question. Lana?
I have a question. Do you guys use end of the course survey in addition to pulling data from Canvas and passing grade?
We do have end of courses survey. I don't know if that's in the lake or not. Laura, do you know?
Well, here's another beautiful thing about lakes and Tableau. Tableau also loves spreadsheets. So you can bring in, for example, you've got all of, you get your SIS and your LMS, and then you bring in from IR the results from a spreadsheet, as long as there's a student ID on there, and then boom, and or the course, reference number. So again, it's a lot in your analytical tool that you're using that is kind of a magical piece here.
And I will say, if you're going to embark on this project, make sure that you have a really good data a person for you, somebody who knows how to build the dashboards. We are so lucky that we have Laura and has this capability. We have a great IR department, and they do a lot with data analysis and setting up studies, and they can pull some data from our SIS system. But it's Laura's mind that really helped us to build it and put it together, and putting the dashboards together, understanding what field is in what system that you need to pull together on the dashboard. There's sort of an art to that. So you want to make sure, if you're going to embark on this project, that you do have a sufficient someone with a sufficient skill set to be able to do that for you. And again, the Tableau software works really well for us, but there is a little bit of a learning curve even for us end users for that. We have plenty of time. Any further questions? Okay, I see something else in the chat. All right. So yes, okay, so teaching experience and training into consideration. Yes, so we did not, that was one of the reasons that we narrowed the study the way that we did. There were so many confounding variables that we did not. And obviously that is an influence on student success. So we could do something like control for the number of years a faculty member has been teaching at the institution, or the number of courses. We could control for that if we built the dashboard for it. But again, again, teaching style would be a little harder to get at, what we, and same with course design. So again, we're working with data, which is quantitative in some ways, right? It's not as much qualitative. So, I mean, we can look at that. We don't have a way right now to look at the amount of training. So for example, we don't have all of our faculty who have some QM certification. We don't have that marked in any system so that outside of QM to be able to dump that into the data lake. Although we could probably feed a spreadsheet into it. So that would be something fun to do, is take all of our faculty who have had QM training, put them on a spreadsheet and dump it into the data lake. So QM certified courses and those not QM certified. I am sad to admit I'm new to the institution. I've only been here for about a year and a half, but I am sad to admit that we don't have any QM certified courses. It is on our radar. We are planning to do that. We're just trying to put together an internal quality assurance process right now. Were your online courses consistent in design? No, they are not consistent in design. We have a very strong faculty union, and they are very much about intellectual property, and they are putting their feet down a little bit on having a consistent design. So we're working on that because we do know that consistent course design, the other studies have shown that it does improve data. It does improve student success. QM in any capacity, but a good comparison to make. Yep. Other questions for us today? Well, if not, I thank you so much for attending our session today. Hopefully this is inspiring to you. And again, if you need any assistance, feel free to reach out to any of us. We are more than happy to help you get started. And we wish you luck and a wonderful rest of the summit.